Greetings, everyone. I'm Melissa Graham Meeks. I'm the Director of Professional Development for Eli Review, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the final session in our Showcase Across the Disciplines series. Today, we're focusing on technical and professional writing. We have a great mix of people who are brand new to Eli Review and some longtime users of the app. So I want to take just 1 second to give you a brief overview of what Eli is. It was a course tool developed by instructors at Michigan State University. Bill Hart Davidson and Jeff Grable developed it about 10 years ago. And the whole point is to promote effective peer feedback and critical thinking. Basically, in the app, students submit a little piece of writing or a long piece of writing, just a task to share, and then they give each other feedback using prompts or questions that you design. Because of the way you design those questions, you get some information about what happened in the peer learning so that you can have a conversation with your class about what they're doing well and where they're struggling. We call that debriefing, but basically it's just talking to your class. And then the next step, students plan their revision by selecting the peer feedback that's most helpful for them and then prioritizing it in a list. And the idea is that they do all these steps as many times as possible in the length of term that you teach. So we have courses that are as short as 7.5 weeks. We have 10-week quarters, and we have 16-week semester-long classes. And people are using Eli Review in various and sundry ways. The showcase is really focused on this step 2 because of the concept of giver's gain. So that's Bill Hart Davidson's word for all the benefits that students get from giving helpful feedback. And you set the stage for giver's gain by the questions you create. So today, I'm delighted to invite Casey McArdle first from Michigan State, and then Liz from Marquette University to share their most effective peer review. The structure for today is about 10 minutes for each presenter, and then we'll open the floor for questions. You're also welcome to use the chat to record the insights that you have as we go. So feel free to use the back channels as available. So Casey, can you tell us a little bit about the course you teach and the writing tasks that you're showing today?
Sure. My name is Casey McArdle. I'm the Associate Chair for Undergraduate Studies in the Department of Writing, Rhetoric, and American Cultures. We have 2 programs there, Professional and Public Writing and Experience Architecture. Sorry, there's a long thing to set up for. I now teach the capstone class, which is the last class students will take before they head out onto market. So this is a pretty complicated class because back in the day, XA was kind of tiny. It's an undergraduate user experience degree. It was very tiny, and we used to meet with students individually throughout the semester. But as it's grown, these have turned into classes. And initially, the class was 36. We fractured it off into 2 separate sections, and this one has 18 students in it. And we do anything from getting them prepped for market by writing letters, resumes, doing informational interviews, actually applying for jobs, and developing their personal portfolios, which they need to be able to have given the certain areas and disciplines they'll go out to and apply for jobs. Does that help? It's a fun class.
Yes, sounds great, Casey. Can you share either
Yes.
the review or the writing task, whichever you want to go through first?
Sure. So this is the student view from the for the writing task. Now I share it with a number of different things. So normally students will get our Google Doc that they'll have that will break down everything in that with concern for requirements and deliverables and criteria. And then I always also paste this within the writing task itself, just to sort of reiterate that student. So just in case they're like, man, what was that writing task about? What's it? Module 4, what's it about? Oh, it's here in the writing task as well. So one of the key things that we want students to do is to get this particular one, because it's about the portfolio, prepped and ready for market, and what this might look like when they actually do informational interviews, or when they're doing interviews when they're going out on the market with prospective employers. So we want to make sure the resume is in excellent shape. They should hopefully have selected a web host somewhere, drafting a text that deals with the about or a bio, selecting the content. It's got to have the resume, sections for different projects, links that work, obviously, clear and solid awareness of design principles, descriptions, simple things that we're asking so that anyone who wanted to take a look at what was happening with concern for their portfolio would then want to maybe give them a job. They might be able to sort of get an idea of what the story is for this particular person and sort of how it might look. So when we do the actual review, this is what it will look like from the student's perspective. Now, every time we have a review task, I totally steal the language from Bill and Eli and put it in here because we talk about good feedback following those particular moves of describe, evaluate, and suggest. And there are videos embedded within Eli that sort of break that down. And so I have students watch those videos and we talk about it. The other key thing is technical and professional writing. We're getting students prepped and ready for market. So it's absolutely essential that our students are thinking about how to give feedback and how to receive feedback because they will be doing this in their professional spaces. So another reason why like Eli sets it up so we can actually model what that looks like in a positive way. Should I take a look at the chat or do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, just keep going. We'll come
Okay,
back to the chat in a minute.
no problem. So this is the student perspective. And so if I'm the student, I've got Catherine and Ben here, and I'm going to take a look at Catherine's text. And the way that it is set up, this is where the text would be submitted. Now, right here for this particular task, the only thing they have to do is post a link to their portfolio. And I'm basically asking simple things with concern for the trade identification. Just simple things. Are these things here to start? Are they present? Is there an about me page, a resume page, a contact page, projects page, navigation, simple things like, are these things here? The basic fundamentals, yes or no, traits, are they present? Then I ask for a scaled response because we talk a lot in this particular class about telling our stories, our UX stories and stories of ourselves as professionals. So I do a scaled response of 1 to 5. Can you talk a little bit about maybe 1 being the portfolio does not tell that story of the author? And then 5, yes, it does in fact tell that professional story quite well. And then they have to give the rating, and then they'll have to explain why they gave that rating. And then I ask for final comments. But I don't have any problem setting up what those final comments should be, just as if I would have a conversation with someone asking them about what feedback is and why it's so important. So we situate, again, what this module is about. And that building a portfolio, it's not easy. It's about learning to be an advocate for yourself, your skills, your role in industry. And I break down the importance of what that feedback would look like and why it's so important to have one. And then I have them begin to ask questions. So as you review the portfolio, are these attributes present in your peers' portfolio? Like what design suggestions do you have? And I have to support those. What content suggestions do you have? And they got to support those. And if you could change one thing in the portfolio, what would it be? Fairly general, because the other ones were slightly precise. And then they have to ask a particular question. And this is one that we just conducted in our capstone class a couple of weeks ago. And if we take a look at the data points on it, you'll see that I can get a pretty good idea of what it's looking like with concern for about 81%. So 81% had the resume, 81% had the contact page, 94% had the project page, which is good because you need those projects so that way prospective employers can be like, what have you done? They can get an idea and ask you questions about it. So 81, 61, 81, 86 isn't bad. And then if we look at the actual sort of rating of this, it's interesting because 3.9, about 4 out of 5, that hits us at about 80%. And we're looking at about an average about 80% here as well, a little bit above. So it's great to sort of see these scaled responses make connections with things that we're seeing in the trait identification. And then we have overall questions as well. I mean, overall comments that students were making as well to one another. So
Okay, so you've given us a little bit of the data on, but why do you think this works? You've used this assignment for several terms. Why are you convinced it's a good one?
you're going to keep sharing? Or I can stop sharing. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay. I think it works because one of the key elements that we talk about extensively within the program itself is the ability to give and receive feedback. And when you structure it and you model it in a particular way that you want them to embody, if not duplicate in their professional spaces, it's absolutely essential that we build something that they can get used to and accustomed to in our academic spaces. So this particular system works well because it's not the normal, I've submitted a long essay for them to give feedback on. It's making them sort of go back and connect and make connections between what's happening in Eli with concern for the directions, as well as that sort of separate website that they have to access for their portfolio. So it makes them go back and forth the same way that they probably would do if they were being asked to do something in their professional space.
Great, thank you, Casey. And
Sure.
there's great questions in the
Oh,
chat that we'll come back to after Liz presents. So Liz,
sure.
can you tell us a little bit about what you're sharing today?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Liz Angeli. I'm here with actually 2 hats on. So how I use Eli is a little bit different. So first, I'm an associate professor of English at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I also am the principal owner of a consulting company that works with first responder agencies, so firefighters and paramedics, to deliver continuing education specifically about report writing. So I use Eli at Marquette. I just started, it's actually my first semester doing that, but what I'm gonna talk about today is how I've used Eli in workplace training courses. To my knowledge, this is one of the first times Eli has ever been used in a 5-hour course, not a 5-week course, not a 6-week course. It was great. And for a little bit of background, so I study first responder documentation, and first responders, paramedics specifically, at the end of every call, they have to write a patient care report that includes a narrative. They don't really get trained what we would consider it the inoculation model of training. They get 1 hour of report writing training. It's like, go forth, write great narratives, and we may never talk about it again. So I'm really working to make that better. And I used Eli to try to do that in an in-person training I had last spring, or this past spring, I should say. Is that good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, all right. All right, so this is the part I share my screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, can y'all see that? Hope, okay. All right, so I'm gonna start with, just like Casey did with the writing task. So to kind of set up the 5-hour class that I was given up basically a whole day to work with new recruits who were becoming firefighters and EMTs for a local fire department. We spent the whole morning talking about what in this room we would consider the rhetorical foundations of effective writing: audience, purpose, ways to persuade, who reads your reports, all that stuff. Then they broke for lunch. Then we came back and I introduced Eli. I said, we're gonna use this really neat peer review tool. You're gonna get a chance to practice your narrative writing based on what you just learned. And you're gonna give each other peer review, and then I will give you feedback too, because this platform is awesome and I can do that. But the specific task that I had them focus on was I showed them about a 10-minute video of a kind of a mock 911 response to a patient who had a medical call. So it wasn't trauma or anything too big, but it was a pretty challenging call to document. So they watched the 10-minute video, they logged onto Eli, and they had to answer these 9 questions, which essentially are the components of what makes up an effective narrative. I should comment that this is more instruction. This is a better prompt than what they're going to get when they're actually on the job. Usually their prompt is write a narrative for this call, and that's it. So I considered these 9 questions sort of training wheels for them to kind of get them thinking about or how to organize their narrative and all that. So they wrote their response, and I sort of timed it. Hold on, I'm trying to move this because they took probably, I'd say, about 10 minutes to write the narrative. Then came the super fun part where they got to evaluate and give each other feedback on the practice reports that they were assigned. And this was actually the harder part. Melissa helped me a lot with this, because there is for all of the standards and protocols that exist in emergency medical services, documentation does not have standards. It just doesn't. I'm kind of working on making that happen. So I really wasn't sure. I was like, well, how do we convert, what I know narratives should have into these traits? And so what we took was sort of standard protocols that the paramedics need to follow for this particular call, which was a medical call, that they'd have to address scene safety. They'd have to know the patient's age, sex, and weight. They'd have to do all this kind of scene size up stuff. And we turned these into traits that the peer reviewers had to mark whether or not the narratives actually had all those components. And you can see there are a lot. This was a 10-minute response, and they have to think of all of these things. And it's not enough to just say we did interventions. They have to actually say what those interventions are and why they did them. So it keeps going. And I had the recruits do the scaled responses to kind of give them kind of a Likert scale or star rating of feedback on the narrative as a whole. And then I did ask them to provide contextual comments and final comments. Before we started this portion of, I forgot to mention the training, we did talk about describe, evaluate, suggest, and we talked about how to give effective feedback, because that's a skill they're gonna need when they move up to be a lieutenant, a captain, a battalion chief, and however else they're gonna be moving through their career. So that was the review task. And then they had a chance to revise, create a revision plan. And then when I got home that day, I gave them feedback on their narratives and their reviews.
So Lily, I'm going to pause just 1 second and say, one of the things that's really clear to me today, looking at this review that we worked on so hard this summer, is that how much implicit knowledge is baked in to the expectation that students can write this report, and how hard it was for us to tease that out as outsiders.
Yeah.
But also how clear it is when you see it here.
Mm-hmm.
So now as you're thinking back on this review, what lets you know we were right or on the right track, and that this produced the learning effects that you desired?
Few things. I guess we'll start first with the quantitative. Whenever I present as the report doctor, which is my LLC, I always do a pre and post evaluation. And in the post evaluation, I specifically asked, there were 9 cadets, or I'm sorry, they're recruits, they're cadets, it's the same thing, how helpful they thought Eli was in learning how to write a narrative. You can see 7 of the 9 thought it was either really helpful or helpful, which was good. And they thought it was, user friendly. There were one person was on the phone, which they said was kind of awkward. So that was helpful for me to know, to make sure everyone has laptops. That sort of more quantitative part was really good for me to kind of say, okay, this is something I'm going to use in continuing training and anything else I do. The other big thing, and I'm just going to stop my share, is the next day I got a call from one of the fire chiefs I work pretty closely with. And he said, after you left, all the cadets wanted more. They said they wanted more report writing training. And that's a highest compliment, because this training's intense, it's exhausting, and nobody really wants to talk about writing, because that's not why they're becoming firefighters and EMTs. So I thought, okay, this is the whole day as a whole. Eli was part of that, and I really think that Eli was part of that day's success.
Great, thank you both for sharing. We'll now open the floor for questions, and you're welcome to use the chat for that or to use your voice. You might want to phrase your response as, I would like to celebrate, or I would like clarification on. Those are 2 easy handles for this kind of feedback. So I'll open the floor for your questions to our 2 presenters.
Do you want us to answer John's in the chat, or?
If you have your answer ready, go, Casey.
Sure. So one of the key things about, John asked, can you comment at the end of the UX on that move placement of prompt when it is extensive? Do you mean like, is that too much text in there? Did students respond to that?
Yeah, that's my question. I started out, like you, I have very extensive prompts, and I started out putting it all in the text box, and again, I have a different level of students. So I'm in like first 2 years research writing sorts of things. I wasn't sure that they were reading all of it. So then I moved to a hyperlink where they've got to go someplace else to read the whole thing. So I just don't know which way to go on that. So it's like, the question is really about user experience. Is it just too much text? Because mine, they would have to scroll down on Eli to read it all. So that's my question. It's like,
yeah,
which way do I go?
I think that's a great question. I think my experience in all the years of teaching these classes, as well as teaching these seniors, is a certain element of redundancy, of doing everything I can to ensure that at no point can they say, what was that module? What was that? I don't remember that. And so that actually, they click on it. When they click on the writing test, it's right there. Because I set up links, I put them in Teams, I can email them to them, I set up in all of our docs, and all of our, everything is linked. Super redundant. So in terms of the UX experience, I think those that have already were in class when we went over that module won't even look at it. They'll just be good to go. They'll paste it in there. Those who didn't will probably scroll a little bit, but then probably go back to the Google Doc just to double check, but then go back to the task just to triple check. So I think it's one of those key things. It just depends on the level of students and the engagement that they might see. Some might view it as being overwhelmed. Others are like, oh yeah, I should probably read this before I submit.
Casey, I think that's a really great point that it hadn't dawned on me in the same way because of LMS integration, right? So like you have LMS integration, and so students have something they see in D2L, and then something they see in Eli Review, and then something they see wherever else you put stuff. And what you're doing is you're guaranteeing that no matter where they enter, they see the full thing, because you can't predict when they're going to enter or where they're going to enter.
Oh, it's tricky to keep track of them. They have so many information streams that they have to enter into, and it's just bonkers. So the best that I can do is make sure that whenever they go to the one that they prefer, they'll find the information they need.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Other questions?
I think I saw another one from John about what could go wrong and what might I do differently in the show. Yeah, so full disclosure, this was my first ever time using Eli. And so Melissa was lovely and basically on speed dial for me when I had a cadet say, hey, I can't log in. I'm like, I don't know how to fix that. And so I would say it's easier now that I'm familiar with how things work. I can kind of walk through troubleshooting and I know what to expect. So I think I know how to set it up better the next time I do this. And that was what one of the cadets say was they would have liked to have more of a conversation about it. So I think I would have given more setup time to kind of talk about, you know, peer review and why it's effective and how to use Eli and why it's going to help them sort of in the long run. But yeah, so many things could go wrong, but luckily nothing too bad did. And Melissa was very responsive.
I'm glad to be responsive. And I've also debated this issue because when Liz told me what she was up to, I was like, are you sure? Like, for real? But the thing is, people always want more time. And if you give them that more time, it doesn't necessarily make them happier, right? Because it's a new thing. It's a new interface. It's always a little hard and a little confusing. And so, yeah, the request for a lower pitched on-ramp is valid, but if you gave it to them, they would still ask for a longer on-ramp. And so this is one of the things that I've learned over time is if you can fit it in, do it. And some people will struggle and most will go, oh, that was fast and it happened and now it's over.
I've given a lot of these mini sort of, they're not as extensive as what Liz has done. Well, that's amazing. Mine have been mostly walking through people through sort of simple like assignments, first year writing assignments, or just having them take a look at things. I've done things for like writing centers, small universities to sort of get them into engage in Eli and options and what they might be able to see. But most of them, some of them already have a significant understanding of what peer review and feedback might be. So when they see it organized in the structure that Eli has, it like, that makes sense. The other key thing is we've had K through 12 come to campus a couple of times, and we've worked with them because they've been on campus to sort of see what's happening in first year writing. So we use Eli as a way of getting feedback on the actual symposium itself. But we structure it in a way that they're sort of seeing what other people are reflecting on that they saw and then giving comments on those reflections. So it's really kind of cool. It was not as robust as what Liz has done, but the opportunities are there. Things will always kind of go wrong, but it's kind of, you know.
I would say one thing too, just thinking about time constraints and stuff. What I always struggle with is showing firefighters enough examples of what reports look like. And because they get to peer review, I still had a few people say, I wanted more examples. It's like, okay, you know, you had more compared to what I did last time, but they weren't at the training the last time. So I think just sort of, it gave them more of an opportunity to see what other people were doing and then learn from each other. Like, not many of them caught that the patient was a Spanish speaker and not speaking English, and that's probably something you want to write in your narrative. And that is something you need to write in your narrative. And so they really, and then they got to talk about feedback to each other and questions they had about writing, which was just, it was very heartwarming to watch them talk about that.
Great. Well, I thank you both. I'm going to stop the recording.